It's an intro, yeah. So, I wanted to do something a little different today. I remember a couple months back, I made the video talking about the future of my channel. It was just after the end of Realm of Realms Season 1, and I mentioned that I wanted to diversify my stuff, which the YouTube algorithm no likey, but I don't really care. I want to do it. And, I don't know if I mentioned this then, but I'm writing a book. And so I just wanted to read some of that out to y'all today. I think I'm going to do the prologue and the first chapter just because the prologue's really short and the chapter's slightly less, and the first chapter's slightly less short. And I have like 22 minutes of background footage of me doing terribly at parkour duels on Hypixel. So just sit back, watch the very poor gameplay. Please don't have an aneurysm over how bad at parkour I am, and just listen to the first part of my book. It's called The Search for Mr. R, and it's a sci-fi, fantasy, middle grade adventure novel. Yeah. Prologue. Raymond Ramsey was running, figuratively running from his mistakes, his foolishness, the monsters of his mind. Also very literally running from a very literal squadron of muscled men. Raymond panted as he ducked into an alley, looking furtively around. His pursuers were nowhere to be seen. He sighed with relief and began to mentally berate himself. If you had just laid low, not made yourself so vulnerable, you wouldn't be in this mess. Now he has Vatak, and I have what? 3 dead friends, 1 cursed friend, 3 kids I shouldn't have involved in this, and 1 very dangerous enemy. He got up and started to look for a way out. Beating himself up wouldn't help him get away. If I get out of this, I can go back to my house and meet up with the Vances and Phoenix. Then we can stop Ronald. Unfortunately, before he could spot an exit, he felt something poke into his spine. A cane. A cane he knew all too well. He slowly turned around to face his pursuer. "Jack," he intoned, in a voice of both fear and disgust. Jack Diamond was a strange-looking man in a normal-looking black suit. He had a pointy nose and shoulder-length blonde hair curled at the ends. He was perpetually smirking with malice, and on his suit, right above his heart, was a red diamond-shaped patch, sewn into the fabric. His cane was swirled red and white, almost like a candy cane, but near one end a small claw-shaped blade poked out, making it look like a mini scythe. However, unlike a scythe, the blade was inverted, curving toward the top of the walking stick, rather than back down. Jack smirked and pressed a latch on his cane, causing the blade to slide back into the cane through a slit that was made to do just that. "Raymond, I have to admit you led us on quite a chase. You caught on a second too early or we would have you in your house. Kudos for that. But we've caught you anyways, and your other friends on the board are either imprisoned or on our side. It's over, Raymond. Surrender." Raymond started to put his hands up in surrender, then darted to his right, colliding with one of Jack's hired guns, who had entered the alley at the exact wrong time. Raymond fell to the ground with an oof, and Jack quickly cracked him over the head with his cane, knocking him unconscious. Jack glared at the sleeping man, kicking him in the side. Then he looked up to bark orders at his goons. "All right, 2 of you carry him back to the housing development. We'll meet up with Dr. White and return to Mr. R." He stooped to pick up Raymond's large hat, as it had fallen off when the man fell. As he walked out of the alleyway, the moon shone over an oblivious Chicago. Part 1. Chapter 1. 7 hours earlier. 11-year-old Gerald Vance stood behind the fruit stall, waiting for his cue. The busy farmer's market buzzed with activity, but not the activity he was looking for. Where are they? He was waiting for Eleanor and Tommy to provide the distraction he needed to pilfer some produce. He didn't like stealing, but it was the only way to eat in downtown Chicago that the 3 orphans were comfortable with. They had gone through too many terrible foster families and orphanages in the last 5 years to seek help from the government or any charities. And they had stopped dumpster diving ever since Tommy had gotten food poisoning. As such, the siblings were forced to steal. Gerald was taking a break from his latest fantasy novel to scan the street when his eyes settled on a man in a suit with ridiculous hair and an even more ridiculous cane, leaning against the wall of the hardware store whose parking lot was where the farmer's market took place every Saturday. Gerald couldn't help chuckling to himself at the man's curled gold locks and candy cane walking stick. The man seemed to be waiting for something, or somebody. Gerald could have sworn that he then looked directly back at him, and Gerald's smile quickly vanished as he ducked behind the stall's table. He peeked back above the table, and the man was gone. This only made him more uneasy. Trying to distract himself, he turned back to his book and flipped a page. The knight raised its sword at Jacelyn, and it burst into purple flame. Jacelyn shouted an arcane word that caused massive spears of rock to emerge from the ground and spear her adversary. The knight! He had to jerk himself out of the universe of the Golden Mirror Chronicles when he suddenly picked out a recognizable voice through the din. Excuse me, sir? Eleanor and Tommy Vance stood in front of the fruit stall, 14-year-old Eleanor holding her 7-year-old brother's hand as convincing tears streamed down his face. My little brother lost a toy around here yesterday, Eleanor explained as Tommy bawled. We were wondering if you could help us maybe look for it. Gerald readied himself by unzipping his backpack and placing his book inside in order to have both hands free. The man nodded graciously. Gladly, and bent down to start searching. Gerald hastily loaded as much fruit as he could into his backpack, occasionally glancing up to make sure the vendor wasn't looking. After his backpack was jammed full, he stood up, nodded to Eleanor, and quickly left. Now it was her job to tie up the loose ends. She made sure the vendor wasn't looking, then pulled a random toy truck they had found in some trash can out of her pocket. She held it up. Oh, here's your truck, Tommy. Tommy took the truck and cradled it. Thank you, Eleanor. The vendor stood back up as Eleanor thanked him. No problem. I'm always happy to help. Eleanor felt guilty for stealing from this man, but they needed the food more than him, so she squandered it and walked away, holding Tommy's hand and leading him with her. No one saw. No one noticed their heist. The food vendor would be puzzled later, but would chalk it up to a miscounting of inventory. No one, that is, but Jack. He smirked at the disappearing kids, then turned and seemed to disappear himself. The siblings met up at their current hideout, an abandoned house in a housing development that had never been finished. It was the skeleton of a home, the floors and wall supports all bare wood, with canvas over the holes that had the logo of some construction company plastered all over it. There were no carpet or furnishings. Reading it out loud to yourself really helps pick out the errors. There was no carpet or furnishings, aside from the torn mattresses the three had scavenged. It was an abandoned relic, and as such was the perfect hideout for 3 kids living on the street. Gerald arrived first and started divvying up their spoils. When Eleanor and Tommy arrived, he each gave them their third of the stash. It wasn't much, nowhere near the amount of food kids their age needed, but it was something, and they chomped into it with abandon. Tommy finished his first and tugged at Eleanor's arm. I'm still hungry. Eleanor paused, about to bite into an apple, then handed it to Tommy, who happily ate it in 2 bites. Eleanor sighed as she was now out of food. She tried to make eye contact with Gerald, but had to snap his fingers to get his attention as he was buried nose-deep in his book. When she got his attention, she shot him a look that said, We can't keep going like this. Gerald quickly nodded, agreeing with her. Eleanor was deathly afraid of separation between the siblings, which had happened before with foster homes and other things. Tommy, having finished the apple, tugged on Eleanor again and asked, Ellie? Yes, Tommy? I miss Mom and Dad. Gerald and Eleanor winced in unison. Eleanor put her arm around her younger brother. Tommy, Mom and Dad are gone. We have to take care of ourselves now. Oh, said Tommy. Tommy responded, yawning. The sun was setting over the Chicago skyline, and it was time for them to go to sleep. Well, I think we do a good job. Tommy lay on his mattress, cuddling up with the stuffed animal the 3 had found in a box marked free in front of a suburban house. Gerald also lay back on his mattress, taking advantage of the remaining light to read his book, but Eleanor stayed up. Eleanor and Gerald traded off keeping watch during the night to make sure they weren't discovered, as anyone who found them would likely contact the police. 3 hours later, Eleanor woke Gerald for his turn. His eyes slowly opened, still half in his dreams, but she put a finger to her lips and glanced at Tommy. They rearranged themselves as silently as possible, with Gerald sitting on a crate with his book and Eleanor settling into her bed. They were just about to settle into the second part of their nightly routine when they heard running footsteps and ragged breathing from just outside the house. They froze. Then Eleanor carefully woke up Tommy. His questioning eyes were curious, but he knew the stakes and was silent. All three quickly hid behind a stack of beams that had never been added to the house's main structure. A man burst in. The chances of this particular man running into this particular house to encounter these particular children at this particular moment were astronomical. And yet, it happened. The man was breathing hard and doubled over, as if he didn't spend a lot of time exercising. He was tall and thin, but not abnormally so. He wore a long black trench coat and an odd-looking wide-brimmed hat, a Capella Romana, which kind of have the shape of a sun hat with the vibe of a fedora. The overall impression of his strange clothing was that of someone cosplaying as a noir detective. He looked up just then, and the children had to stifle a gasp. The man was bald, at least from what they could see. No hair poked up from the brim of his hat. But more strikingly, he only had one working eye. His right eye was pale and pupilless, unseeing. It was split by a ragged scar that ran down the side of his face from his right forehead to his right cheek. It looked old and faded, though, like the injury that had caused it had happened a long time ago. He glanced around furtively, likely looking for his pursuers. His gaze swept over the kids, noticing them, and he yelped in surprise. He shrank back, surprised to see 3 kids in an abandoned house. The 3 broke into an outright run, Eleanor dragging Tommy just behind her. Gerald looked back, and as the man stared at him, recognition sparked in his eyes. The man cried out, "Wait, kids! Gerald? Eleanor?" Eleanor paused and turned back to the man, shocked. "How do you know our names?" The man's face filled with the strangest combination of happiness, worry, remorse, and relief. "It's really you?" He stood up and started slowly walking toward them. Eleanor was about to start running again, but the man held out his hands. I promise, I'm a friend. The man swallowed. "I knew your parents." Now they all stopped talking, staring at him like he had sprouted another head. Their parents had died 5 years before, on one of their many business trips. None of the kids recognized this man. Eleanor gave him a shrewd look. "Who are you?" Raymond Ramsey." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Wait a minute," she murmured, more to herself than to Raymond. She turned to Gerald. "I recognize him now. He didn't have the eye thing." She traced her finger down the side of her face, imitating Raymond's scar. "But do you remember the people who used to hang out with our parents? The one they did business trips with?" Gerald nodded his head. "From their stories." The man continued. "I can't tell you anything else right now. I'm being chased. Here." He took off his hat. He was, in fact, bald, and fished around inside. He pulled out a business card. Raymond Ramsey, VATEC, 7492 Slipknot Way. "Go to that address, and I can tell you more. Now, I need to go. If I were you, I'd get as far away from here as possible. And don't lose that card." He ran off into the night. The 3 kids stared off at the spot where he had disappeared, wondering if that strange interaction had even actually happened. Then, the voices came. And that's the end of Chapter 1. I hope you guys enjoyed the beginning of Search for Mr. R. Honestly, reading back through it, this section is kind of meh. It's very cliched urban fantasy, like 3 orphans living on the street. It gets better, I promise. There's a lot more characters. They're a lot more interesting. We meet the Phoenix person Raymond mentioned in the prologue and the rest of the board that Jack was talking about. They're all great. I really love writing pretty much all the characters in here except for the main 3 kids, ironically. But I hope you enjoy the excerpt and the terrible parkour. But please leave a comment down below. Tell me what you thought. This is like I play video games, but I am a writer at heart, and like I don't get to stretch my writing wings very often. Like there's Realm of Realms, but we don't really do that, and Realm Treaders, which we don't really do very often. And this is like an actual novel, which like most people see that as being kind of above a heckin' YouTube series. If it was as popular as the Dream SMP, people might care, but whatever. So please comment down below. Share this with people who like sci-fi fantasy novels. Subscribe if you don't actively dislike me. And goodbye.